Welcome back to the channel and to our cheapo UTV engine swap project. As you can see, we've made some real progress with the Hisun 800 Strike, and the 420cc Predator engine has no problem getting this buggy moving again. In the previous episode, we covered exactly what it takes to drop this engine into the 2010 Hisun chassis and still retain the four-wheel drive system. Basically, we show you how to build a 4x4 UTV for cheap, because these Hisuns don't really sell for much due to the notoriously bad engines that came with them. Today, we're going to try and finish this project or come real close to it. Let's look at the list of things we need to do. Well, first we need to finish installing the drive shaft for the four-wheel drive system. After that, we can verify that the four-wheel drive works. We need to get rid of this silly fuel tank and install a proper fuel system with a fuel pump. Install a working accelerator because, you know. Oh, and we're going to need a shifter for the forward-reverse dual-range transmission, so let's put that on the list. While we're at it, we'll do the parking brake because, well, it may be handy. We're also going to need to lower the idle because this happens. Now, lowering the idle ain't as easy as it sounds because we're going to be doing it the hard way. I'll get back to this in a moment. Oh, and since this buggy is made for off-road, we're going to upgrade the engine with a low-cost 300-watt charging system. That way, we have enough power for off-road lights if we need them, and of course, this winch draws a lot of power as well. Now, everything except the idle should be plug-and-play, or at least very easy to sort out. The hardest part of this engine swap was installing the engine, and that wasn't too hard at all. Okay, let's get started. Unfortunately, in order to finish this project, we have to take a step backwards and remove the engine. Once the engine's out, I can install the drive shaft for the four-wheel drive system. Now, we didn't do this in the previous video because we were waiting on a bearing that didn't arrive on time. So this red cap was just a temporary solution for our missing bearing. The original bearing was unsealed and it required a constant oil supply, which wouldn't work in our application. So I sourced an identical sealed bearing that has a lifetime lubrication. And once I remove the red cap, we can pop this guy right in there. Keep in mind, the Hisun engine was directly bolted to the transmission and the drive shaft for the four-wheel drive passed through the engine block. This flange that we're removing mimics the part of the original engine block, and this was all covered in the previous video. Whoops, I guess I should have drained the transmission first. My bad. The good news is I did put a pan underneath to catch any drips. So all we have to do now is pop this bearing in here and we're golden. And it's in. So this bearing is sealed and it has lifetime lubrication. Now on the other side of this gizmo, there's another seal to prevent any transmission oil from getting past the shaft. So this stuff should work out pretty good. Fast forward a few minutes and I have the drive shaft finally installed. In theory, the four-wheel drive should work now. I did make a mistake when I built this mounting system and I forgot to account for the width of the bearing that we just installed. So I had to shim this hanger bearing out about 3/8 of an inch in order to make everything fit. It looks a little sloppy, but it works and that's all that matters. Now when I turn one of the back wheels, you can see the drive shaft for the front axle spins. Very nice. Even though the drive shaft spins for the front axle, the four-wheel drive won't engage until the button on the dashboard is pressed. I'm not a big fan of these push-button deals. Alright, let's move on. In order to get the idle on the engine to go a lot lower, we're going to try an experiment that may or may not work. And we're going to remove the compression relief mechanism from the camshaft. Removing the compression relief will allow us to adjust the idle to go a lot lower than normal. So that will definitely work. The downside of this modification is the engine may become very hard to start. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Whoops, I damaged the gasket. No worries, I have a new one in stock. Since we'll be taking the camshaft out, I reckon we'll also need to loosen the rocker arms a little bit. This will mostly help with reassembly after we modify the camshaft. Okay, that should do it. Off camera, I went ahead and aligned the cam and the crank timing marks. Again, this is going to help us with the reassembly. Anyway, the dot on the cam gear lines up with the mark on the crank now. At this point, I can pull the camshaft. So this gizmo on the camshaft is the compression relief, and it's activated by centrifugal force while the engine's running. The problem with this guy is, when we lower the idle to where we want it, the engine is spinning way too slow and the compression relief kicks in. So, as an experiment, we're going to totally remove this gizmo, and this will keep the engine from stalling when we lower the idle to where we want it to be. Now, the alternative to removing this gizmo is to weld a big blob of metal to this counterweight to increase the weight, and that may actually work, but it may take a few attempts to get it right, and that means pulling the engine a few times, although I may actually be able to get to the cam with the engine still installed in the buggy. Well, say goodbye to the compression relief mechanism, and now we can get the engine to idle lower, but we may have problems getting the engine to start because the starter may not have enough power. Fast forward a little bit, and the camshaft's installed with the timing marks lined up, and I'm ready to reassemble. The gasket for the side cover was greased instead of using any sealant. The grease method is a trick that the old timers did, and it makes a good seal. Plus, it keeps the gasket from sticking to the surface. So, in theory, the gasket won't be damaged if the engine has to be disassembled again, which we may or may not have to do. You know, I did a lot of research and I couldn't find any information about the success or failure of removing the compression relief mechanism. The engine will certainly run just fine. However, my biggest concern is the electric starter may not have enough power to spin the engine over. So we'll find out one way or the other. With the engine out, now is a great time to install the 300 watt or 25 amp charging system. These charging systems can be very expensive, and if you shop around, it seems like the best deal you can get is buying direct from WSEPO in China. Now, I picked this kit up last year and I don't recall what I paid for it, but the current price is $79 plus shipping. So shipping can be expensive, but overall you still save a bunch of cash by buying direct. I've dealt with this company a few times in the past to get hard to find parts, and it's a trustworthy company. I put a link in the description for this charging kit, but if you poke around the website, you may find a lot of other treasures. Anyway, the 420 engine normally comes with 1 or a 2 amp charging system, which isn't going to be enough for our buggy since we have a winch, an electric starter, and headlights. So this will take care of all our power needs. The flywheel has 10 magnets, which is a lot. Now, the voltage regulator is plug and play. The yellow wires plug directly into the charging coils, like so, and the other 2 wires go to the positive battery terminal and the negative battery terminal. Easy peasy. Okay, let's get this cover off so we can get to the flywheel. So I'm going to put this nut back on the crankshaft because we're going to need it in a moment. The nut should be screwed in just so it's flush with the tip of the crankshaft. Now, with a screwdriver applying some force in this direction, I'm going to hit the nut with a brass hammer. Never use a steel hammer for something like this. And the flywheel will pop right off the crankshaft. Whoops, I forgot to remove the magneto. The ring gear on the flywheel will not slip past the magneto, so I have to remove it in order to get the flywheel off. The new charging coil is bolted in place with these 2 bolts. This little sheet metal thingy was original to the Predator engine, and it keeps the wires in place, so I reused it. And over here is the original Predator grommet, which also got reused. Now, since the flywheel's off, now is a good time to install an offset flywheel key to advance the ignition timing. For this engine, I grabbed a 4-degree offset key from my stash. Now, 4 degrees is a good starting point for a stock engine, and a little bit makes a big difference. The offset key should be installed like this. The arrow pointing to the front of the engine is pointing towards the spark plug side of the engine. Once the flywheel's installed, it's good practice to verify the key is still in place. Now, sometimes they can get pushed out when installing the flywheel. If everything's fine, then you can go ahead and reinstall the plastic fan and torque down the flywheel nut. To get the proper spacing for the flywheel, I'm going to use a very rare robot Cantina business card, which is about the right thickness. Anyway, I'll cut off a chunk of the card and slip it between the magneto and the flywheel. I'll use the magnet on the flywheel to suck in the magneto, and then I'll tighten the bolts. This will set the magneto to the perfect distance or close enough. At this point, I think we're done with the engine and we can install it back in the buggy. Fast forward a day or so, and the street legal go-kart is back together again. This time a little bit more refined. Let's take a look. The parking brake works again, and getting the brake to operate was as simple as reconnecting the cable, and no modifications were needed. The cable does get pretty close to the engine, and I'll probably need to add a heat shield just in case. The original fuel tank wouldn't fit. Well, it would, but there wouldn't be any way to service the clutch. So I went ahead and bolted in a 2.5 gallon aluminum fuel cell. This guy was $64 on the Jungle site. Now, the smaller tank allows easy access for servicing the clutch and the drive belt, which was impossible with the original fuel tank. Now, to get fuel to the carburetor, we ended up using a $10 electric fuel pump. This is a low pressure fuel pump, but it puts out way too much fuel pressure for the Predator carburetor. So the trick we did was to put a T in the fuel line to split the flow of the fuel. This fuel line goes up to the carburetor and this line goes back to the fuel tank. Now this clamp adds a bit of restriction to the fuel line, so we have just enough pressure at the carburetor to keep the engine happy. Of course, we need to put another clamp here to prevent the fuel hose from popping off, so no worries, that'll get done soon. The accelerator is now connected, and pushing down on the pedal will operate the stock Predator governor throttle. The only thing I had to do here was to build a little bracket to mate the Hisun cable to the Predator throttle assembly. Easy peasy. The Hisun shifter is still in its original location, however I did have to notch and weld a few of the brackets in order to have enough clearance for the valve cover. This was a fairly easy modification overall. Now, the Predator muffler is not staying and it will get replaced with a proper exhaust system eventually. So the plan was to get everything else in place, and whatever space is left over, we'll use that to route the exhaust. To me, that made a lot of sense. Anyway, as you can see, we didn't do anything with the exhaust yet, and for today it'll be okay. Aside from being real close to the exhaust right now, the shifter cable pretty much just dropped in place without any issues. The voltage regulator for the 300-watt charging system upgrade got mounted to this motor mount brace, which was the perfect spot for it. The upgraded electrical system should help keep the tiny battery charged, which is a nice touch for this project. Now, not everything went perfect. The camshaft modification has some drawbacks. Let's check it out. So, if I'm lucky, the engine's going to start. Yep, the engine started and it idles perfectly now. Let's try that again. Uh-oh, well, I reckon there is a reason for the compression relief mechanism. So, I did upgrade the battery cables to 2 gauge, and I even tried a bigger battery. Nope, the starter just doesn't have enough power to crank the engine over when it's on the compression stroke. Right now, the only way to fix this is to pull on the starter to get the engine past the compression stroke. Let's try it now. Alright. Let's try it again. Yep. And one more time. Uh-oh, now we're in a pickle. So this sucks, and I kinda thought it would happen. Now there is hope, and I do have a plan for a future modification that will allow the engine to start and have a perfect idle. But that's not happening today. Well, the good news is the engine idles really nice now and the clutch doesn't drag anymore, which is what I wanted. Now, ironically, I have to tighten this nut up slightly to get the idle to come up so I can finish my demonstration. Alright, let's put it in gear. So now it's in two-wheel drive with an open differential. As you can see, I can stop this wheel and the differential allows the other wheel to spin. Very nice. Now if I push on this button, that'll lock the differential and provide more traction if needed. Anyway, with the differential locked, I can no longer stop this wheel. This gizmo on the differential is what locks and unlocks the axle. So the speedometer works and we're theoretically going 5 miles per hour. Now let's switch in the four-wheel drive. So the four-wheel drive feature is really nice to have for some folks, and it can be done with the Predator engine swap. For me, it's hard to say if the four-wheel drive is really necessary. I plan on driving this thing on the pavement most of the time. However, if I can get a snowplow for this thing, I think four-wheel drive would be a lot handier. Of course, it doesn't really snow that much in this part of Kansas. Okay, show and tell's over. Let's have some fun. Uh-oh, the diesel Chevy S10 got stuck in the tall grass again. Meh, this is typical for a Chevy. The good news is, this gives us a chance to use the winch to rescue the little truck. So it's hard to say how much current the winch draws, but given that this buggy has a tiny battery, the winch would be practically useless without the upgraded charging system, especially if you use the winch a lot for some reason. Mission accomplished, I guess. So in low or high range, the Predator engine has enough power to tow the truck, but using low range puts less stress on the CVT drive belt, so that's the better option. Next, we'll try pulling this 1,800-pound utility trailer. Now, I've moved this trailer with my garden tractor, and it'll move it, but not great. The Predator-powered UTV seems to have no problem with the tongue weight, and it tugs the trailer no problem. Meh, I guess these things are good to have for utility purposes, but there's also a fun part which appeals to me a lot more. So across the yard, I can get this thing up to 25 miles per hour. That's according to the speedometer. Who knows if that's the actual speed? Let's see how fast this thing can go with the pedal to the metal, or plastic in this case. Not bad at all. Okay, let's see how this thing accelerates in four-wheel drive. No wheel spin, no drama. If that's the sort of thing you like, then four-wheel drive has a purpose. Let's try two-wheel drive. Hell yeah, that's what I'm talking about. A little bit of chaos is always better. Man, I tell you, I could drive this thing all day. It's fun. The engine idles perfectly now, although we do have to come up with a better solution for the compression relief debacle. Not a big deal. I have some ideas I want to try. Anyway, this thing looks kinda goofy without its body panels. So, let's hang the panels on it and see what got affected by the engine swap. Fast forward and most of the plastic panels are in place. Actually, all the exterior panels still fit without any issues. Now here's something that I noticed. The chassis on this buggy is very flexible without the roll cage installed. You know, I don't think this rig would last very long if the roll cage were emitted. That's not an issue with the engine swap, that's just the way this thing is built. Interesting. The plastic utility bed is sturdy, but not great. It's probably better suited for hauling light loads like fishing and camping gear. Now, I tend to abuse stuff, and if I were to use this rig for pure utility purposes, I would get rid of the plastic bed and use a plywood bed. Now, the driver's seat seems to fit no problem, which is very nice. However, on the passenger side, the seat's going to have to be raised about an inch. Now, if we built this thing as two-wheel drive only, we could lower the engine quite a bit and everything would fit without any issues. Apparently, keeping the four-wheel drive takes up some extra space, that's for sure. This plastic console thingy won't fit anymore since we kept the 4-wheel drive, but it would likely fit for 2-wheel drive. Now on the driver's side of the buggy, the plastic cover is fine and there's no clearance issues. However, on the passenger side, we run into some fitment issues. Now, I reckon the plastic thingy could be trimmed to fit, but I'm not going to do that, and I'm okay with not having this cover installed. So a new or a nice used name brand 4-wheel drive UTV will cost a small fortune these days, and building your own from a scrapped off-brand UTV is definitely a way to save some bucks. The engine that we use generates about half the power the original engine made. However, overall performance seems to be okay so far. The dual range transmission provides a nice low gear for pulling heavy loads, which more than makes up for the less power the engine develops. Now, something to keep in mind, using low range takes the load off the engine and takes the load off the drive belt. Regardless of the engine power, low range prevents mechanical systems from being overstressed, so that pretty much applies to a cheapo UTV and name brand UTVs. Now, if you want your buggy to last, use low range when pulling a heavy load. Now, the nice thing about the engine that we used, it's a clone of a Honda GX390 engine, and parts are cheap and plentiful. Obviously, we used the Harbor Freight version of this big block, but there are actually a few different versions of this engine, and some can be found for less money than the Harbor Freight version. Now, in my opinion, the 4-wheel drive may not be worth the extra effort. I certainly will never use it, and I prefer the chaos associated with 2-wheel drive. Of course, that's just me, and some folks may find 4-wheel drive handy. Well, I had hoped we could finish this buggy in this episode, but we still need to work out the exhaust system and come up with an acceptable solution for compression relief. Anyway, I had a lot of fun today, and this is by far my favorite project. We'll see you next time. Until then.